This is a question that many of you have asked me both in person and online. So let's explore together. First of all, we can divide this question into two parts. Why do we have rivers and why do we have lakes? And to be honest with you, I think that we can answer the second part first, because the answer to it is much easier to explain. The main reason we have lakes is because of what happened in the past. More specifically, during the Ice Age, huge glaciers covered much of our planet. They carved valleys, including some that were quite deep. When these glaciers melted around 12,000 years ago, they left behind large bodies of water which became lakes. In Finland, for example, about 90% of lakes were formed by glacial activity. This is also true for many other countries like Sweden, Canada, the USA, or even China. But it doesn't explain why we don't see lakes in Africa or in Australia. Well, the thing is that these two continents have geological histories that are different from the ones of North Europe or North America. For instance, Australia has always been isolated from the rest of the world, so it never had huge ice sheets covering it. As for Africa, although it did experience an ice age, this one was much more mild than the one we experienced here in the Northern Hemisphere. There were no glaciers, but it might have been cold enough for rain and snow to carve out some basins that eventually became lakes. The best known example is Lake Chad, which at some point might have looked like a big sea connected to the Atlantic Ocean. However, this is not a common phenomenon. So to summarize, lakes were mainly formed by glaciers and tectonic activity. Of course, there are exceptions like oceans, which were formed when the Earth's crust cooled, and there was enough water on the planet to fill up the lower areas, or deltas, which are formed by rivers. But that brings us to the next question. Why do we have rivers? I would say that rivers are one of the most interesting features of our planet, and their existence is connected to several key aspects of the Earth's system. First of all, rivers are connected to the water cycle, which is the movement of water on, above, and below the surface of the Earth. This movement is driven by solar energy and gravity. Solar energy comes in the form of radiation, which warms the Earth's surface. Then the water from the oceans evaporates and forms clouds. Clouds move around the globe, and eventually the water precipitates back to the surface as rain or snow. Most of this water flows over the land surface and eventually finds its way into the rivers, which then carry it back to the oceans. It's a continuous cycle with no beginning and no end. But where does the water come from? When it rains, does it only come from the ocean? Well, although the majority of the water that falls on the land surface originates from the oceans, there are also sources of water that come from the ground. In fact, a significant portion of the water that feeds rivers during dry periods comes from underground water reserves. And if you want to learn more about how groundwater works, you should definitely watch my video about aquifers. I will leave a link to it in the description. As for the shape of the rivers, this is due to erosion. This process depends on the geology of the region and the climate. Let's take the famous River Nile. For instance, its drainage basin is shared between 11 countries. This area includes mountains, deserts, and flatlands. The upper part of the river flows through high mountains, where it quickly erodes the rock. This means that the riverbed is constantly changing, and there are many rapids and waterfalls. As the river flows downstream, the landscape becomes flatter, and the river loses its speed. The sediment load decreases too, so the riverbed becomes wider and deeper. Finally, the Nile ends its journey in the desert, where it deposits all the sediment it has been carrying since its source. Therefore, the last part of the river is surrounded by fertile lands, which are highly populated and cultivated. This whole process is called river aging, and it usually happens with all rivers, even though in some cases the changes are less visible. Another aspect worth mentioning is that rivers are also influenced by human activities, such as dams and irrigation. Dams can alter the flow regime of a river and affect its morphology, while irrigation can change the amount of water available for the river to pick up from its basin. And now, we are ready to tackle the first part of our question. Why do we have rivers? To answer this question, we need to go back in time and look at how our planet formed. When the Earth formed about 4.5 billion years ago, it was a very different place than it is today. There were no continents, just a hot, molten ball of rock. But as the Earth began to cool, the heavier materials like iron and nickel sank to the core, while the lighter materials like silicon and oxygen rose to the surface. Over billions of years, these processes created the Earth's layers, the crust, the mantle, and the core. The Earth's crust is the outermost layer of the planet, and it is divided into two types, oceanic and continental. Oceanic crust is the part of the Earth's crust that is found under the oceans, and it is made up of dense rocks like basalt. Continental crust is the part of the Earth's crust that makes up the continents, and it is made up of less dense rocks like granite. Oceanic crust is thinner than continental crust, and it is constantly being destroyed. Mid-ocean ridges, where two tectonic plates meet, and one plate is pulled beneath the other. At these same mid-ocean ridges, new oceanic crust is also being created. On the other hand, continental crust is more resistant to destruction, and it can be recycled back into the mantle only in very exceptional circumstances. Rivers play an important role in shaping the continental crust. They weather and erode the rocks, transporting sediment from one place to another. Over millions of years, this sediment is deposited in layers that eventually become part of the rock record. By studying the composition of these rocks, geologists can learn about the history of the Earth and the evolution of life on the planet. In addition, rivers are also important for shaping the Earth's surface. They carve out valleys and canyons and transport sediment to the oceans. This process helps to regulate the Earth's climate by distributing heat and moisture around the globe. In summary, rivers are a vital part of the Earth's system. They play an important role in shaping the Earth's crust, surface, and climate. Without rivers, our planet would be a very different place than it is today. So next time you see a river, remember that it is not just a body of water flowing through the landscape. It is a powerful force that has shaped and continues to shape our planet. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel to learn more about our amazing planet. And if you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them down below. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next video.